Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. Is Alabama a better job than Washington? That's what we're going to talk about, along with all the coaching moves that have transpired since Nick Saban surprisingly retired. And obviously, it had massive implications for the Big Ten and one of the Big Ten's newest members. And that's what we're going to talk about that. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. Also, make sure to leave reviews, leave comments. There's some comments I haven't gotten to in a while that I want to make sure I get to later on. Again, a shout out to my Illini buddies who I'm blanking on your name right now, but you gave some pretty sweet feedback on Spotify. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Appreciate the Illini fans. Appreciate all y'all. So make sure you keep this thing running. We're going to keep going because there is no off season in college football anymore. So we're going to keep dropping these podcasts. Special guest coming on Monday. Excited to have a guest from Nebraska who's going to come and talk all things Nebraska football. Justin Adams, who has appeared on the Big Ten Huddle. I believe he's also appeared on Mark Rogers, the voice of college football. Excited to have him on the show. He's going to talk a lot about what's been going on with Matt Rule in Nebraska. So make sure you tune in. That'll be dropping hopefully Monday morning. But this is Thursday morning. And I want to put into context a few things. So last week, Nick Saban retires. You know, still don't know everything, but we know that Nick Saban is sticking around the program. And certainly had, I don't know if he had anything to do with the hire, but what transpired, I believe about 48 hours after the retirement, Washington head coach Kalen DeBoer left Washington to go to Alabama. Many at first, I think, saw it as a step up. Obviously, Alabama has won 6 national championships since 2009, right? So obviously has pedigree, tradition, all that stuff. Kalen DeBoer goes to Washington, or goes to Alabama, leaves Washington. Since that has happened, they've lost a number of players to the transfer portal. Obviously, have had a lot of NFL declarations. The other piece of the puzzle here is that Jedd Fisch, the head coach of Arizona, now goes to Washington. So we're gonna dissect a couple things here. The first thing that I want to talk about here is leaving Washington, where Kalen DeBoer had it. Is Alabama a better job? Now, I know what you're thinking. As soon as I ask that question, the immediate answer is Of course, yes. Look at what Alabama's done. Look at what Alabama has accomplished. Look at what Alabama has recruited. Like, have you seen Washington recruit versus Alabama? And that's true. But I think we're starting to see the Saban effect, particularly in the transfer portal. As of recording, Caleb Downs has entered the transfer portal. Caden Proctor has entered the transfer portal. There have been a lot of NFL declarations. There's a lot more rumors of more Alabama players entering the transfer portal. And so it seems very clear that a lot of those players there were there for Nick Saban, maybe more than Alabama. Now, do I think Alabama's going to completely fall off? No, I don't think so. But it's the thing that I thought about as soon as Saban retired was how much of Alabama is actually, how recession proof is Alabama? And here's what I mean. There are some places where you get a bad coach and it completely wrecks your program. Michigan is a good example, right? You know, Jim Harbaugh just won a national championship. By the way, lots of smoke that he is on his way out, most likely to the LA Chargers, but we'll get to that when it's official. We'll talk about that. But at their best, national championship. At their worst, 3-9, right? Nebraska fans, oof, you know this, right? Bad coach, Bill Callahan, losing record. Bo Pelini, not great, but good. Consistent 9-10 win seasons. And then Scott Frost, Mike Riley. It's all bad, right? And then there's other programs that are kind of recession proof. I think Ohio State is one of those programs, right? Because they have a great infrastructure. So like their worst coach in the past 40 years, arguably, is Earl Bruce. It's either Earl Bruce or John Cooper. And like, it's so recession proof that we're talking about firing Ryan Day with going 11-2, and that's a massive failure, right? It's a recession proof program. I think in many ways, I think Georgia has been that. I think Oklahoma to some extent has been that. You know, Texas has had a few down years, but I think traditionally Texas. But there are very few schools that are recession proof. If you make the wrong hire, you still have a pretty high floor. I don't think Alabama is as recession proof as maybe we thought it was. Now, before I go any further, I don't think Kalen DeBoer is a bad hire. I actually think it's a great hire. I thought between him and Dan Lanning, I thought those are the two best names. You know, Dan Lanning, I think, was probably the best choice because he's coached in the SEC. He knows what it takes to win an SEC title as a coordinator. I think what he's building at Oregon is probably the biggest threat out of the big four coming out of the West as they enter the new look Big Ten. But Kalen DeBoer has won wherever he's went. He's won with a less talented roster, right? Like he beat, I think a more talented Texas team in the Sugar Bowl. I think he beat Oregon twice, and they were probably a little less talented than Oregon. Like he just wins. So I am not making the case that Kalen DeBoer is a bad hire. What I'm saying is that a lot of people may not be at Alabama because it's Bama. I think a lot of people were at Bama because Nick Saban was the coach. And that means something, right? Like it means a lot, especially in this day and age where players can just kind of get up and leave. And so you're starting to see that while I think Alabama is a tradition-rich program, obviously I think has the most national championships of any program in college football history. It's also relegated really to two head coaches who have unparalleled careers in Bear Bryant and Nick Saban. And then a lot of right? Like Gene Stallings has a national championship to his name in 92. But everything else outside of Bear Bryant and Nick Saban is pre-poll era, right? So it's not a recession-proof job. And as Kalen DeBoer is going there, he's leaving a roster that, quite honestly, was going to have a lot of turnover, right? Penix, the receiver room. I think we've gotten to a point because DeBoer has left, maybe the entire offensive line, Trice on the defensive line declared for the draft, a couple other defensive stars declared for the draft. So Washington doesn't have the talent, the roster that Alabama had and maybe still has to some degree. Like that's very clear, right? But he could have at least kept some of that intact if he stayed. And as he's going to Alabama, a lot of the key pieces that I think he probably counted on are now leaving, right? And not only that, but key coaches are leaving. Now, apparently Saban's still going to be involved in some way, which leads me to believe that part of Saban's leaving is there's probably some more urgency there for him personally than and that's been speculated. So I don't want to go further than that until it's shared publicly. But the reality is Kalen DeBoer probably thought he was leaving for a fully stocked, fully on board program. And instead, you've got a lot of transfers, you have coaches leaving, and you have schools that are taking advantage, right? Georgia is one of those schools. A lot of people think Georgia is going to get Caleb Downs. But then I think you have other schools, right? Iowa is, I think, the leading favorite for Caden Proctor, which would be a massive boon for the Hawkeyes to get a 5-star stud offensive tackle to lead that line as you're trying to remake your whole offense, getting a new offensive coordinator in there. That's a big deal. And so Alabama is getting picked over. Their roster is getting picked over. Not a lot of sign of slowing down. It begs the question, did Kalen DeBoer make a mistake leaving Washington for Alabama? And I don't think it's as clear cut as people might say it is, because Alabama, if he's able to recruit and he's able to really maintain the infrastructure and build, it might be a better job. I'm not sure he'll ever win a national title at Alabama. And that's not anything against him. It's just, can he be a front runner? Can he get the snowball rolling so that it becomes the death machine that Nick Saban got it to be? Because the thing was, and you're seeing it with the transfer portal now, when Nick Saban came to your door, you dropped everything and you listened, because he wasn't just football coach. He was Nick Saban, right? It wasn't that Alabama's head coach was coming. It's that Nick Saban was coming. And while Kalen DeBoer, I think, can really show off, hey, look at what I did at Washington. Look at what I've done everywhere else I've gone. Look at how I've gotten guys in the NFL. That's going to matter. But he's also got some work to do to get momentum going. And I don't think people realize that. Another struggle that he's going to have, and college football nerds brought this up. Others have brought this up. A lot of players have taken essentially NIL pay cuts to get the opportunity to play under Saban. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. And if you look at Alabama, while they do have a rich alumni base, you don't have necessarily the wealthiest alumni base. And that's going to become problematic as long as we live in this NIL world. So now my hope is that the rules of NIL changes and it becomes more regulated, because right now it still feels like the Wild Wild West, and I hate it. I mean, it just flies in the face of what we all wanted in actually paying the players what they're due. This is not what this is. This is collectives and boosters buying players. That's not NIL. That's fans basically paying for whoever they want to throw money at. That's not what this should be. It's never what it was meant to be, but that's exactly what it's turned into. Lest I get into a rant about how bad the NCAA is, the NCAA stinks. Regulate the darn thing. That being said, you have to understand that because we live in this current NIL world, Alabama actually is playing at a disadvantage. Washington actually might have more of an advantage in the NIL landscape, right? They're in a major metropolitan area in Seattle. They're in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, which probably has more money. It's near California, which has more money. So if you have an alumni base that's out in California, more than likely they have more access to funds. In Alabama, you don't have nearly as many wealthy boosters and donors. Sure, you have many boosters and donors and all that stuff. But I'm just saying, in terms of amount, I'm not sure that Alabama actually has the wealth to be able to continue to compete like they did under Nick Saban. And so I think it's very possible that, as great of a coach Kalen DeBoer is, and I think he will punch above his weight from a talent perspective, right? Because he's proven that. He proved it this year with Washington. But I think you have to ask the question, would he have been better positioned to continue to build momentum at Washington if he had stayed? Now, I can understand from the other side of this, because even if he was able to keep a couple of his offensive linemen from transferring, this was not going to be the same team and the same program as this year. Like the Huskies, they've recruited well. They're a top 25 caliber team. But just remember, we're 3 years away, or 3 years removed from Washington being one of the worst teams in the P5. I believe they lost to Montana State week 1 in 2021. So it's not like Washington has been a world beater. Kalen DeBoer did a lot to make them a really good program. Some of that was the transfer portal. Some of that was player development. Some of that is just he's a darn good football coach. So it's hard to say. I think where they're positioned right now, depending on who leaves Alabama, I think you can make an argument that they are. I think Alabama's probably a little better, but I don't know how much longer that will last. And I think Kalen DeBoer, if he had stayed and built a greater foundation for the Huskies, I think they easily could have surpassed Bama, depending on who Bama got to replace Nick Saban. As it is, they got Kalen DeBoer, and I think he'll do well there. I think the other obstacle for Kalen DeBoer, and it's not going to matter as much in the national picture because we're going to the 12-team playoff, but it's that you are very much at a disadvantage right now going toe-to-toe with Kirby Smart. Because Kirby Smart has the talent edge. He's probably as good of an X's and O's coach, has built a really good staff. And now he's got all the momentum because he's keeping his roster intact for the most part. Whereas Kalen DeBoer's got to scramble. And let's not forget the timing of this thing, right? So the timing, Alabama doesn't have really an opportunity to go after players in the transfer portal. They're just going to lose players because of the way the transfer portal rules work, right? Alabama, the transfer portal has closed except for players where a coach has left. So Nick Saban left right before the transfer portal window closed. Alabama is now going to lose all these players and they have no way of restocking. So that's another disadvantage here. And so Kalen DeBoer is starting with one hand tied behind his back. It's a bummer because I think Kalen DeBoer is a really good coach. And yet he is going to have to face off with, I think, the team that has become the death ball, the Death Star type program, which is Georgia. They're not going anywhere. Their talent, all that, that's going to be a really tough uphill climb. Where if you looking at Washington, I think Oregon's going to be a problem, but they're losing a lot. Like as much as they have people coming in, they have a lot of people coming out, right? Good chunk of their defense, good chunk of their offense, all leaving. So they have a couple of offensive linemen coming back, a couple receivers, but a big core of their team, offensively and defensively, are leaving, right? USC losing a lot, right? Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, we're not sure what he's doing, but a massive group leaving from Michigan. So really, I think Oregon concerns you. I think Ohio State concerns you. But Ryan Day is not Kirby Smart as of yet. He has not accomplished what Kirby Smart has done. And so while from a roster perspective, I think you can make an argument that Ohio State is building a championship level team by bringing everybody back, it's not nearly the same challenge, at least at this point, that Georgia is for Alabama and for the rest of the SEC. And not only that, you have Texas, who's bringing back Quinn Ewers. Sark is building something good there. So it's tough to tell. I don't think Washington is a better program than Alabama, but I would have liked Kalen DeBoer's chances at Washington better for the next 3 to 5 years because of where he's starting at Alabama rather than where he'd be continuing to build at Washington. I also think, and I'll continue to say this, until we are out of the conference world. And what I mean by that is at some point, I believe the conferences will kind of stop being independent of each other and will go to a more commissioner-led model similar to the pros. I just think it has to go there eventually. But until that point, I would argue that Washington is in the better infrastructure. As good as the SEC is, I think from a financial perspective, an academic perspective, all those things, I think Washington is in the superior conference when it comes to those things. And I think we're seeing the dividends, right? Michigan just won a national championship. Washington was just in the national championship game. Part of that is that the resources are much more in favor right now of the Big Ten, even though the SEC has a fat contract. I'm not saying the SEC doesn't have money. I'm saying the Big Ten has positioned itself very well from an infrastructure perspective. So I think there are a lot of hidden advantages that could have really benefited Kalen DeBoer if he had stayed at Washington rather than gone to Alabama. And honestly, I think that's why Dan Lanning did not leave Oregon, Because even though there's a lot of turnover on that roster, I would argue Oregon's the better job because Oregon has the backing of Nike, which they will keep Oregon funded for a long time. Like, I think that's why Oregon might be the biggest threat in the Big Ten to Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. Not just because the infrastructure that Dan Lanning's building, but because they have the backing. That's just the reality of where we're at in college football right now. So I think Oregon, and I think that's why Dan Lanning didn't leave. Like, he sees what he's building, and he sees that in the next 5 to 10 years, I think you can make a real case that unless if Kalen DeBoer knocks it out of the park, which I don't think is out of the question, I think we're sitting here in 5 to 10 years and we're looking at Alabama as maybe a top 20, top 15 team, and maybe every once in a while playoff contender, championship contender, and maybe Oregon being a mainstay. I think that's very much in contention here. Now, before I close up, I do want to talk about who Washington hired. Washington hired a guy by the name of Jedd Fisch. He's the Arizona head coach, excuse me. And there's a few things that bother me about this hire. I'm not bothered that Washington got Jedd Fisch. I don't think it's an A+ hire. Like, I think he's got some experience. I don't think it's an A+ hire. I don't think it's a bad hire per se. I just don't think it's an A. But the two problems I have with it, one, and again, it's going back to some of the roster stuff, because Kalen DeBoer left, you have a reality that you are losing a lot of your roster, more than you would have if Kalen DeBoer stayed. Are we sure that Jedd Fisch is leaving for a better job? Now, granted, Washington is a better job than Arizona overall. Like, I don't know if people would ever think Arizona is a perennial national championship contender. Arizona is in the new look Big 12, which is not nearly as stable of a conference as the Big 10. So from those two facts alone, Washington easily is a better job. So this is Jedd Fisch taking the more stable job and the more attractive vision long term, for sure. Arizona finished 10-3 this year. They finished on a hot streak. And now he's going to go to a depleted Washington roster. If he doesn't do well in the next 2 to 3 years, which is very possible because of who you now have to face in the new look Big Ten, it almost could blow up your entire coaching career. Now, by blow up, I don't mean like he'll never coach again, but you're talking about you fail at Washington, you're probably going back to a group of 5 school, or you're going to be a coordinator again, which may not be the worst thing in the world, but it may not be the right timing for someone like Jedd Fisch. Here's maybe my bigger concern. And this is why I don't like the hire as much as maybe others do. Reportedly, he told Arizona he was not going to interview for the job. And an hour later, he interviewed and accepted the job. And then, he put out this very nice graphic thanking everybody at Arizona. He had a 3-minute meeting with his players to tell them he was leaving for the Washington job. And I have a lot of issue with that. Listen, I know that coaches climb the ladder, and that's why I'm okay with the transfer portal being the way it is, letting players leave. If coaches are going to leave for, to chase a paycheck and to chase prestige, then I can understand why we let players do it. Right? But you're still called to be a coach. And the reality is the best coaches, they don't just chase the money and they don't just chase the championships. They love their players. They care about their players. And I'm not going to question the character of Jedd. I'm not going to sit there. I'm not going to sit here and say, he doesn't love anybody. I don't know that. I don't know the intentions of his heart. I don't know his heart. What I do know is that if I were in that locker room as a player who gave, the past 2-3 years, gave him my body, my strength, my time, all those things, and he walked in after a great season and gave me a 3-minute explanation that he was gone and then just bolted, I would not feel loved. I would not feel supported. I would not feel appreciated. I would feel like I just got let down by a person who is supposed to be a mentor, a person who's supposed to coach me up and teach me about life. What he just taught me about life is, well, when the better opportunity comes, bye. And it's part of what I hate about this new world, but also it's also the thing that concerns me about the way that some coaches come across. Now, he may just not be a good people person, and he might just be a brilliant mind. And sometimes a brilliant mind gets you really far in the coaching industry, particularly as a coordinator or maybe at a lower level school. But if you don't know how to love your people, if you don't know how to be a good coach, like a good people coach, like you might have one good year, but like, what are you going to do when you get to Washington and they're coming off a national championship berth and they go 5-7 next year? I'm not saying they will, but like, what do you do? How can those players know that you're in it for the long haul? Right? He was interviewed by Athlon Sports, or at least there was an article in Athlon where he said that Washington presented a vision for him to be a championship caliber team year in and year out. Listen, that's great. If we look at the history of Washington, at one point, have they been a perennial championship contender? Their last national championship was in 90. In the Pac-12, which has been a weaker conference overall, they've had a couple of good years in the past 20. But like, this is not a slam dunk move by any means. I know I'm probably shooting my own Alabama-Washington argument in the foot right now. But like, my point is, Jedd Fisch is not necessarily going to achieve championship results with the roster he inherited. Is he going to be able to captivate a locker room, show them that he cares about them, show them that he can build a roster in the right way, that, when the going gets tough, that he's going to be for his guys? Like, I have real questions about that. Now, maybe he does, because he did it, he did do well at Arizona, and they had a lot of losing, they have a losing history, at least over the past several years. But I don't like how he left it at Arizona, and that raises question marks for me as he enters, quite honestly, a much tougher conference, a depleted roster, and just, yeah, that's it. Depleted roster and a tougher conference. So is Washington let's come full circle. Is Washington a better job than Alabama? No, it's not. but I think Kalen DeBoer could have made it a better job for the next 10 years. And I think the fact that Jedd Fisch has come into Washington, I think really leaves it up in the air. I will say this. I think Kalen DeBoer will do much better at Alabama than Jedd Fisch will do at Washington, which is unfortunate because I was really looking forward to Washington coming into the Big Ten. Fisch could prove me wrong. You know, I've been wrong on so many coaching carousel things before. But there's something to be said about a coach who loves his players. And, Kalen DeBoer, one thing that he did that I give him a lot of credit for, I think the way he left, I think it was sad but well received in the way that he told his players, the way he left. And when he got to Alabama, even though there's a lot of transfers, he had a players only meeting. He says, hey, give me a chance. Like, I know I'm not Coach Saban, but give me a chance. And he's working in tandem with Nick. So I have a lot of respect for that type of shepherding, that type of coaching versus I think what Jedd Fisch has done. So again, that's not to make a judgment on Jedd. I'm critiquing what has happened. Jedd might be a great shepherd and a great, he might really love his players, and we might see that on the field translate into the way that they care about each other on the field. But I really hate how he left his former situation, and I loved how Kalen. I didn't love how Kalen left it, but I appreciated how Kalen left. So that'll do it for this episode of the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Again, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. YouTube, like, subscribe, leave comments, send me emails at big10footballtalk@gmail.com. I will respond to you. I will give you shout outs on this show. And a request from all of you, if you know of other podcasters who are looking to collaborate, my goal right now is to get different podcast hosts from all 18 different teams in the Big Ten, so that we can have a myriad of voices to hear and give insight and information on every team in the Big Ten. And so Monday, we're gonna have Justin on to talk the Huskers. Really pumped to have him on the show. And we're gonna have more and more guests, hopefully, as well. Love you all. Thanks so much for listening. Take care. God bless.